The window unit was dying, and it wanted everyone in the Makati executive suite to know it. It rattled in its metal housing with a rhythmic mechanical clatter, clack clack hiss, that felt like it was keeping time with my own racing pulse. It was the only thing fighting the Philippine humidity, which pressed against the fourth floor windows like a heavy, invisible wool. I lay there on the damp sheets, staring at a cluster of water stains on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a map of a country I would never visit, feeling like a god. Lani was draped across my chest, her dark hair a tangled silk spill against my pale, aging skin. She was still catching her breath, or at least she seemed to be. Every few seconds, she would let out a tiny, exhausted whimper, a sound of such profound physical satisfaction that it made the last 20 years of my life in the Ohio suburbs feel like a grayscale waiting room. Back home, the bedroom had become a theater of silence. My ex-wife Sarah had mastered a specific kind of clinical endurance, a way of lying still that told me exactly how many minutes of her life I was wasting. By the end, I had started to believe that my body was just a collection of declining statistics, a thickening waist, a slowing heart, a fading relevance. But here, in the dim glow of a street lamp filtering through the grime, I had been rediscovered. I was not a retired middle manager with a stent and a pension. I was a revelation. "Mark," she whispered, her voice a melodic rasp that vibrated against my ribs. "You are too much for me. I think I cannot walk tomorrow." I felt a surge of pride so intense it was almost dizzying. I reached out and stroked her shoulder, my fingers calloused and spotted with age, feeling the incredible firm elasticity of her youth. I believed her. That was the intoxicating part. I chose to believe that the intensity of the last hour was not a product of my bank account or the blue 1,000 peso bills sitting on the nightstand, but a genuine reaction to me, to my experience, to the hidden prowess that Sarah had simply been too cold to elicit. The air conditioner gave a particularly violent shudder, a metallic thunk that vibrated through the floorboards. It was a reminder of the world outside the door, the choked alleys of Poblacion, the smell of diesel exhaust and grilled pork, the desperate, frantic energy of a city where everything is for sale if you know the right currency. But inside this room, the air smelled of Lani's jasmine soap and the salt of our sweat. I looked over at the nightstand. My watch was there, a heavy gold piece I had bought myself after the divorce, resting on top of my leather wallet. Beside it was the stack of money. I had placed it there before we started, a gift for her family's medical expenses, as we had both agreed to call it. It was a necessary bit of punctuation in our dialogue, a way to keep the reality of the transaction from curdling the romance of the encounter. As long as the money was for her mother, I could still be the hero of the story. Lani shifted, propping herself up on one elbow. Her eyes were dark and unreadable in the shadows, but her smile was brilliant. She began to trace the line of my jaw with a delicate finger. "I like you, Mark. You are different from the other foreigners. They are fast. They do not care. But you? You know how to make a woman feel like a queen." The vanity of it hit me like a hit of pure oxygen. I wanted to be the exception. I needed to be the one man who was not just another Americano with a blue seal passport and a lonely heart. I ignored the way her eyes flickered toward the nightstand. Just a microsecond, a habit of survival rather than greed, and focused instead on the way she leaned back into the pillows, inviting me back into the illusion. The air conditioner groaned again, a long, dying whine that signaled the compressor was giving up. The room began to warm almost instantly, the heavy heat of the Manila night reclaiming the space. Lani did not seem to notice the rising temperature. She reached for me again, her movements fluid and practiced, her voice dropping to that breathy, urgent register that had convinced me I was 25 again. "Again?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly with a mix of disbelief and ego. If you have the strength, she teased, her hand sliding down my chest. But I think you are too strong for a small girl like me. I laughed, a sound of pure, arrogant triumph, and pulled her closer. I did not hear the warning in the rattle of the window unit. I did not see the exhaustion behind her eyes that she was so carefully masking with a theatrical gasp. I was the lead actor in a grand romance, and I was determined to give the performance of a lifetime, oblivious to the fact that for her, the show was just a very long day at the office. The heat did not just return, it settled in like an unwanted guest who knew they were not being charged for the stay. The air conditioner had given up on the hiss and was now just a rhythmic hollow thump thump that sounded like a dying heart. Sweat began to pool in the small of my back, making the cheap polyester sheets cling to me like a shroud. I was breathing hard, too hard, and my chest felt tight, a sharp reminder of the $4,000 procedure I had had 2 years ago. "You are so strong, Mark," Lani whispered again. It was the exact same cadence as 10 minutes ago, the exact same pitch. It hit me then, a small cold needle of doubt. It sounded less like an observation and more like a line of dialogue. I looked down at her. She was still arched, still performing the geometry of desire, but her eyes were fixed on a point just past my shoulder. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the cheap digital clock on the dresser. I watched her pupils track the red numbers for a fraction of a second before she realized I was watching and squeezed her eyes shut, letting out a high melodic moan that felt rehearsed. "Lani?" I asked, my voice sounding thin and old in the stifling air. "Yes, Po, my king," she smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Her hands, which had been roaming my back with such passion, were now just resting there, their weight heavy and passive. I felt a sudden frantic need to prove the illusion was real. I moved to kiss her, to find some genuine friction, but she tilted her head just enough that my lips landed on her cheek. It was a professional maneuver, a subtle boundary drawn in the middle of a supposedly boundaryless act. "You are tired," she said, her voice shifting from breathy to practical in an instant. She began to disentangle herself, her movements efficient and devoid of the lingering silkiness she had displayed earlier. "You must rest, Mark. Your heart is going boom boom. I do not want my favorite American to get sick." "I am fine," I lied, sitting up. The room did a slow, nauseating tilt. She was already off the bed, wrapping a thin sarong around her waist with a speed that felt like a dismissal. She walked over to the nightstand. My heart skipped, not from the exertion, but from the sight of her hand hovering near the stack of bills. She did not take them. Not yet. Instead, she picked up her phone, her thumb dancing across the screen with a frantic, expert speed. The blue light of the screen washed out the queen I had seen earlier, revealing a tired 24-year-old with dark circles under her eyes and a posture that screamed exhaustion. "Everything okay?" I asked. "My mother," she said, not looking up. "The pharmacy is closing soon. I must check if my sister got the medicine." It was the script. We both knew it. But for the first time, I noticed the inconsistencies. The sister she had mentioned earlier was a brother when we had had dinner. The medical expenses were for a heart condition, but now she was talking about a fever. The cracks were small, but in the silence of the dying air conditioner, they sounded like gunshots. I looked at myself in the vanity mirror across the room. In the harsh, unfiltered light of the street lamp, I did not look like a god. I looked like a man who had paid for the privilege of being lied to. My skin looked grey, my hair a thin, pathetic halo. "Lani," I said, reaching out to touch her arm. She flinched, only for a second, but it was there, a lightning-fast reflex of someone who spent their life being touched by people they did not want to be near. She masked it instantly with a sweet artificial giggle, leaning in to pat my cheek. "You are so sweet, Mark. Such a gentleman." She used the word gentleman the way a soldier uses a rank. It was a category, not a compliment. I realized then that she was not reacting to my prowess or my experience. She was managing me. She was navigating the ego of an aging man the same way a pilot navigates a storm, with careful, practiced adjustments designed solely to reach the destination without a crash. The air conditioner gave one final wet clunk and went silent. The only sound left was the frantic tapping of her thumbs on the screen and the distant, mocking wail of a karaoke machine from the street below, singing a love song that neither of us believed in. I looked at the money on the nightstand. It was still there, a stack of crisp lies. I wanted to take it back. I wanted to demand the truth. But as Lani turned back to me with that perfect, empty smile, I realized I was too terrified of the silence that would follow. "Do you really like me, Lani?" I asked, the question sounding as pathetic as I felt. She did not answer right away. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes flickering to the gold watch resting on the leather wallet. "Of course, Mark," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of warmth. "You are the best. I told you, no?" She walked back to the bed, but she did not lie down. She sat on the edge, her body tense, ready to move, her eyes already scanning the room for her shoes. The goddess was gone. The employee was just waiting for the clock to run out. The silence left by the dead air conditioner was heavier than the noise had ever been. Lani was in the small, cramped bathroom now. I could hear the sharp, rhythmic splash of water against the plastic basin, the sound of a quick, efficient scrub. It was not the lingering, sensual bath of a lover. It was the industrial cleanup of a worker at the end of a shift. I stayed on the bed, my body feeling every one of its 58 years. The revelation I had felt earlier had curdled into a dull, throbbing ache in my knees and lower back. I looked at the nightstand. The money was gone. I had not even seen her take it. She must have swiped it with the same practiced fluidity she had used to stroke my chest, a sleight of hand so perfect it felt like magic. When she stepped out of the bathroom, the transformation was complete. She was wearing a faded denim skirt and a t-shirt that said Gap in cracked silver letters. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, sensible ponytail. The goddess had been packed away into her handbag. "I go now, Mark," she said. Her voice had lost the melodic rasp. It was flat, carrying the weary exhaustion of someone who still had a long jeepney ride ahead of her. "So soon?" I asked. I reached for my watch, wanting to anchor myself back into the role of the man in charge. "My sister is waiting at the pharmacy," she said, her eyes already on the door. She did not look at the bed. She did not look at me. She looked at the space where the transaction had ended. "Thank you for the gift, Mark. You are a very kind man." She said kind the way someone describes a reliable ATM. I watched her check her reflection in the spotted mirror one last time. She was not checking to see if she looked beautiful for me. She was checking to see if she looked normal for the world outside. She adjusted her collar, tucked her phone into her waistband, and turned the handle. "Lani," I called out, desperate for one last spark of the illusion. "I will see you next week? Same time?" She paused, her hand on the frame. She gave me a small, tight nod, the professional acknowledgement of a recurring contract. "Yes, Po, if you like." Then she was gone. The door clicked shut with a definitive metallic sound that echoed in the empty room. I lay back down on the damp pillows. The heat was a physical weight now, pressing the breath out of my lungs. I thought about the whimpers, the gasps, the way she had told me I was too much for her. I realized now that those sounds had not been a response to my body. They had been the grease on the gears of a very difficult machine. She had not been overcome by passion. she had been performing the labor of making an old man feel like he still mattered, because that was the only way to ensure the gift for the pharmacy stayed on the table. My experience, my prowess, it was all just her patience. I had not been the lead actor. I had been the customer who bought a ticket to a one woman show and was arrogant enough to think the actress was actually in love with the character I was playing. Outside, a jeepney roared past, its engine a ragged, desperate scream that cut through the Makati night. I looked back at the water stains on the ceiling. The map had not changed, but the territory felt completely different. I was not a god in a temple. I was just a tired man in a rented room, surrounded by the smell of jasmine soap and the suffocating, honest heat of a city that did not care if I stayed or vanished, as long as the currency kept flowing. The biggest mistake was not the stamina I lacked or the techniques I did not know. It was the vanity of believing that the noise she made was about me, when it was really just the sound of her survival. I stood up, my knees cracking like dry kindling in the heavy silence. The floor was sticky where the jasmine soap had not quite masked the reality of the night. I walked to the mirror and did not look for the revelation or the lost prowess. I just looked at the man who had bought a story and was now sitting in the ruins of the set. The mistake was not my age, or my heart, or my technique. It was the terminal arrogance of believing that for 1 hour the laws of economics had been suspended just for my benefit. I had mistaken her professional courtesy for my personal charisma. I had confused service with desire, and in doing so, I had committed the ultimate sin of the aging traveler. I had made a tired woman work twice as hard just to keep my ego from bruising. I picked up my heavy gold watch and strapped it back on, the metal feeling cold and honest against my skin. The room was just a room again, hot, cramped, and overpriced. I realized then that my experience had not been a gift to her. It was a burden she had navigated with the clinical precision of a bomb squad technician. The truth was simpler than any romance. Lani did not hate me, but she did not want me either. I was not a lover, and I was not a god. I was just a high maintenance hurdle between her and a decent night's sleep. The louder they moan, the more they are just trying to help you cross the finish line so they can finally go home.